Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to our Citylaw Breakfast today. I'm Ross Sandler, Professor of Law and Director of the Center for New York City Law, and I welcome you here today to our Citylaw Breakfast. These breakfasts, as you know, are co-sponsored by Consolidated Edison, Verizon, the Murray Goodgold Foundation, and the law firm of Greenberg Traurig. We're grateful to them for the co-sponsorship. Today, we're delighted to have Rose Gill Hearn, Commissioner of the Department of Investigation, with us. It's a wonderfully important department of the City of New York with a history that goes back very far, beginning with the Tweed era when its forerunner was created, and then into the 20th century with under Mayor John Perroy Mitchell, when a wonderfully famous Commissioner Fearless Fosdick led the department, recreated again under LaGuardia, under William Hurlins, and today has emerged as a central aspect of the city's efforts at both management and efficiency as well as corruption control. Rose Gill Hearn came to the job with the Bloomberg administration. She had been Deputy Chief of the Criminal Division in the Southern District of New York, a graduate of Marymount College and Fordham Law School. We welcome Rose Gill Hearn to New York Law School.
Thank you very much, Russ. In the late 1870s, William Boss Tweed was a corrupt politician who dominated city government. He conspired with the mayor, the controller, the chamberlain, now known as the Commissioner of Finance, among other city officials. Thus, he used those who wielded the power and the purse strings in city government. He cleverly controlled the various components of city government that are supposed to serve as checks and balances on one another. His schemes included getting contractors to present excessive bills for work performed on every city contract and development project entered into in the city. For example, I'm sorry to report that the city was overbilled for the Brooklyn Bridge, but there's nothing I can do about that now. All told, Tweed and his cronies skimmed an estimated $200 million from the city's coffers. There was no mechanism in city government to stop them. Tweed's ring began to unravel after a disgruntled employee from the controller's office who felt betrayed by the ring stepped forward. The Tweed ring had created a phony set of books for the city's finances within the controller's office that disguised the money that they were siphoning. The disgruntled employee copied the genuine records of the city's expenditures, and when those records were compared to the bogus ones, it exposed how Tweed's corruption had defrauded the city. The disgruntled employee's expose was published in the New York Times. Tweed's power ended, and the public was outraged. Today's Department of Investigation owes its existence to Tweed and his unscrupulous co-conspirators. In their wake, the public then realized that they needed to create an agency to root out and prevent public waste and fraud. They knew it needed to be an independent one and one with sharp teeth to address the kind of corruption that they had suffered. In 1873, the Office of the Commissioner of Public Accounts was formed, the precursor to DOI. Today, I can report that things are certainly better than they were in the 1870s. But in a city that employs an estimated 320,000 workers, has an annual budget of $56 billion, and spends an additional $13 billion on capital construction, the need for DOI has not diminished. Our mission is much the same as it was at our inception 130 years ago. DOI remains the city's watchdog when it comes to malfeasance and fraud. Our jurisdiction is broad, and it includes every city agency, employee, elected official, anyone doing business with the city, anyone receiving benefits from the city. We take a comprehensive approach to rooting out corruption and wastefulness. By that I mean our goal goes beyond just making an arrest. We also seek to remedy the problems within the city procedures exposed by our cases to avoid reoccurrence. As it was in Boss Tweed's time, we rely heavily on the many honest city employees to come forward and blow the whistle on corrupt schemes. Executive Order 16 bolsters that reliance, mandating that city employees report without delay any possible corrupt activity taking place within city's government. Pursuant to the executive order, city employees may be terminated if they fail to do so. Thus, the possible inclination for city employees to not get involved was eliminated by law. The city's whistleblower law protects employees from retaliation when they come forward and report something to DOI. This dual statutory scheme of a mandatory report obligation with protection for whistleblowers yields a tremendous flow of information to DOI about matters that should be investigated. Conducting investigations requires a balancing act of thoroughness and fairness. In addition, we go where the cases and evidence take us without regard to politics or agendas. Recently, during an orientation for new DOI employees, I explained the goal that these new recruits should always keep in mind. Their client is the City of New York, a place that can be viewed as a faceless entity, an easy target, where theft and malfeasance wouldn't be readily detected. I told them to push past that misperception and have a sense of urgency about their work. They shouldn't forget that protecting the city and its residents is at the core of what we do. So, for example, if school custodians steal from the money they are given to maintain our schools, the result is that those schools will be dirtier, shoddier places, which is horrible for our New York City kids, and we've done approximately 40 such cases. If DOB plumbing inspectors decide to take bribes in lieu of inspecting the gas lines beneath our streets, that raises a public safety issue. We did approximately 20 of those arrests in 2002. DOI just did 9 arrests of contractors who were paying laborers far less than the legal requirement on city construction projects because the contractors wanted to pocket the extra cash. So there are real victims behind these cases. With respect to the Buildings Department, I am pleased to say that in the past 5 years, we have made significant improvements in turning around what was an accepted culture of bribery. In 2002, one of the earliest cases I faced was the arrest of the 20 DOB plumbing inspectors. To give you some context, there were only 2 remaining plumbing inspectors not arrested. And one of the arrested inspectors had previously been arrested for bribery, got a slap on the wrist, returned to the Buildings Department, only to take up his same corrupt practices. In studying the history of the problems at the DOB, I learned that roughly every other year for decades, a double-digit number of inspectors were arrested for bribery. The situation was ridiculous, and I felt it called for a forceful, concentrated, and smarter pushback. I spoke to the mayor about the approach I wanted to take and received his full support, without which I do not know if we would have achieved the same results. Commissioner Lancaster, who's here today, became DOI's full partner with this effort. With respect to the inspectors arrested in 2002, we had the mayor write a victim impact letter to the judge, certainly not something a judge receives every day, explaining the effect of this corruption and that it was very, very real, including that his buildings commissioner had to hire a company to tear up the streets to inspect those gas lines not inspected by the defendant inspectors at a cost of $5 million to the city. A number of these inspectors received jail time, which was a shock to them and was precisely the message that we wanted to send. Going forward, we also referred for prosecution those members of the public who were offering the bribes to our inspectors. We have now done more arrests of individuals who offered bribes to DOB and other agency inspectors than ever in the history of the office. Commissioner Lancaster also asked us to try and bring about arrests as soon as possible when we know someone in the agency is corrupt. I agreed DOI would make prompt referrals for prosecution, and our turnaround time in some cases has been a matter of days. We also combined forces with DOB to create a sizable unit that conducts investigations of DOB matters. Coupled with many other steps taken by Commissioner Lancaster, including implementing a code of conduct for the department, we have seen a sustained turnaround in the culture at DOB, and we have not had a double-digit number of inspector arrests in the DOB since 2002. That is not to say that we think that things are perfect or that we can now become complacent. We will remain vigilant in this area, but this is an unsung success story that I believe the public should know about. DOI has done arrests ranging from taxi drivers who are licensed by the city, ripping off foreign visitors coming into our airports, to elected officials or former officials for taking money or property in exchange for their influence. DOI's cases are sometimes about children, elderly, and low-income New Yorkers who look to city-funded not-for-profit organizations to provide much-needed programming and assistance, but instead see those funds siphoned off by greedy organization leaders. This was the case at the Gloria Wise Boys and Girls Club in the Bronx, where DOI found that Gloria Wise executives took more than $290,000 for their own personal use, gave $875,000 to one executive's private business venture, which went into bankruptcy, and routinely falsified records on how public funds were spent. And in order to pass a health inspection, they sunk so low as to create falsified records indicating that children in their nursery programs had been vaccinated. When DOI began its investigation, executives even falsified records to give to DOI, purporting to show some of the fraudulent expenditures were legitimate. The result of our investigation was that several of the executives were charged with obstruction of our investigation and larceny. But more was needed. So DOI issued a series of recommendations demonstrating ways that city agencies and not-for-profits can help protect themselves against fraud and abuse. DOI has assisted the new administration of Gloria Wise to rebuild that once vibrant social service agency so that it can again provide essential services to the co-op city community. And DOI recovered $625,000 in city funds from Gloria Wise that had been misspent by the agency. We will continue to ensure that those entrusted with running not-for-profits that receive funds are using the money to help the community, not themselves. When DOI makes an arrest of a public official for wrongdoing, I want the agency's investigators to remember that the victims in these cases are all New Yorkers. Public tax dollars are at risk, but so too is the public's faith in municipal government. I hope the DOI's existence, its vigilance, and its referrals for prosecution that result in convictions and punishment will help restore the public's confidence in this area. So during the last year, several of the agency's complicated public corruption investigations resulted in the arrests of current and former high-level government officials. Most notably, these include the arrests of New York State Senator Ephraim Gonzalez, State Assemblyman Brian McLaughlin, and State Assemblywoman Diane Gordon, as well as the conviction of former New York City Department of Correction and Police Commissioner Bernard Kerik. Since 2002, we have focused efforts on public outreach and education about DOI's role in city government. Beginning in 2002, DOI has conducted hundreds of in-person corruption prevention lectures to employees at agencies throughout the city, which have been a key way for us to get the word out about who we are and alerting people to their obligation to report wrongdoing to us. In fact, the case against Diane Gordon broke open as a result of a tip that DOI received in one of those corruption prevention lectures. DOI is a lean agency with about 280 full-time employees, so we do more with less, as the mayor told us to. In 2006, for example, we made a record-setting 422 corruption-related arrests. So far in 2007, we have conducted 300 corruption prevention lectures, which is already a record number for the year. We supplement our investigative resources by adding eyes and ears to the agency's monitor program, in which private integrity monitors are mandated for contractors who have experienced integrity issues but have demonstrated that, with close supervision, they can be relied upon to be responsible contractors. The private integrity monitors are paid for by the contractors, but they report directly to DOI on the activities of the contractor through the life of the contract, and DOI guides and oversees their work. DOI currently has 8 integrity monitors in place for contractors engaged in such things as construction, electric work, and computer programming for the city. Among the more notable monitor agreements were several that enabled the city's Department of Transportation to service and maintain the city's streetlights and traffic lights, while DOT rebid contracts for those services. These agreements were necessary to ensure the integrity of the contractor's performance in the face of allegations of misconduct contained in the indictment of Assemblyman Brian McLaughlin. So, while integrity issues arose with those companies, DOI recognized the city cannot have a disruption in such vital services, and so the monitor agreements we arranged accommodated everyone's concerns. DOI's monitor program has received national and international attention for its success in helping to ensure the proper expenditure of funds in connection with the cleanup at the World Trade Center site. Last spring, I was asked to testify before a congressional committee regarding our monitor program. That committee studied our program as a model for the federal government to use to avoid fraud and waste when called upon to provide services under emergency circumstances in the wake of disasters such as Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. One of DOI's great strengths is that we issue public reports of our findings and recommendations, a powerful and effective tool for exposing problems in any given sector of city government, mandating reform, and maintaining transparency in government. A case in point is a recent DOI investigation that found 14 members of the fire department, including some high-ranking personnel, had submitted phony college degrees in order to get promotions and appointments. DOI issued a report in January describing the ways in which this scheme worked and the procedures at the fire department that allowed these employees to get away with their scam. The fire department worked closely with DOI to revise its degree verification process, and that is how it should work, and shows why writing reports and offering recommendations is so important. It can help change things. Similarly, after numerous rats were videotaped freely roaming around a Greenwich Village restaurant, the Department of Health asked us to investigate the situation. DOI looked into how and why the health inspector did not fail this restaurant just a day earlier. We did not find evidence of a bribe, but we did learn that the inspector underreported her findings and was less than diligent in her work and lacked supervision. We shared our findings, including our recommendation that the DOH simplify their restaurant grading system for inspections and to terminate the inspector. By making our findings public in the form of a report instills confidence that the system isn't afraid to bear all and make improvements where necessary. A Section 8 fraud investigation we conducted a year ago necessitated interviews by our investigators in a Brooklyn apartment building. During that investigation, the DOI investigators came back and reported that they were seeing horrific living conditions such as filth, rodents, broken front doors, windows, fire escapes. We also encountered a man living alone in squalor. While we were there to investigate fraud, we called upon the relevant city agencies, HPD, Fire, DOB, to form a task force with us to go back and do a basement-to-roof inspection of that and several surrounding buildings owned by the same landlord. Over 1,500 violations were cited, and we contacted Adult Protective Services to assist the gentleman we found in dire need. While we have consistently issued policy and procedure recommendations to city agencies in the wake of our cases, this year we established a system to solidify that process by putting all recommendations in writing and following up to make sure that city agencies are taking the appropriate corrective actions. We are seeking to go back 5 years to check to the fullest extent possible that corrective actions have taken place at the city's agencies. In another new initiative, DOI created a lobbying law unit after Mayor Bloomberg and Speaker Quinn worked together to enact groundbreaking legislation reforming the city's lobbying law. The DOI lobbying unit has begun to train staff at the city clerk's office to fulfill their role of auditing the lobbyists' disclosure statements, and DOI's lobbying unit will also investigate any possible criminal violations. DOI has become a national and international model for corruption prevention, investigation, and enforcement programs. In the fall of 2006, DOI staff exchanged information with Chicago city officials who were seeking to reform the oversight of their city government in the wake of a number of highly publicized scandals. Chicago's Inspector General and senior members of his staff spent 2 days at DOI learning about our statutory independence and our investigative powers that make DOI's oversight effective. Chicago is moving forward using DOI as a model. In fact, I just returned early this morning from a meeting with Chicago Mayor Richard Daley and his 40 commissioners to discuss DOI's anti-corruption program. In addition, over the last 5 years, DOI has hosted dignitaries from more than 60 cities and countries seeking guidance on the best practices to combat municipal corruption. In January, executives from the Republic of Tanzania came to DOI to study our practices, information that they are now putting to good use with their 1,000 investigators. And in February, I made a presentation about DOI at the World Cities Conference on Fighting Corruption and Safeguarding Integrity in Amsterdam, bringing the efforts of DOI to a global audience. Today, I've come full circle, bringing DOI's message and mission to all of you. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions.
Now, as we always do, we like to invite questions. There are microphones at both ends. While people are going to the microphone, I'd just like to acknowledge some of the people that are here. First, my old friend Mike Armstrong, who has many incarnations in this area, but I remember you most as counsel to the Knapp Commission. Richard Condon, now the Inspector General of the Department of Education. Jim Gill, Chairman of Battery Park City. Glad that you're here. Bob Tierney, Chairman of the Landmarks Preservation Commission. Patricia Lancaster was mentioned earlier as somebody who's cooperated with DOI. Happy that you did that. Jerry Goldfeder, who has just been appointed special counsel to Andrew Cuomo. Where is he? Anthony Crowell, counsel to Mayor Bloomberg. I must say, if you would, we're happy that people ask questions. If some of you are reluctant, you may not state your name. And that way you'll be anonymous. Let's start on this side.
My name is Aaron Biller, and the question I have is about why the city has not pursued an investigation that was revealed by Controller Thompson's office concerning the shelter program, where the city is going in and paying luxury rates and no-bid contracts. The amount of waste per year is over $100 million, which would make Boss Tweed very happy. And what is happening is the city is going into, is rewarding slum landlords, bringing in homeless tenants into buildings that have SRO tenants. The SRO tenants are being pushed out of the building by the homeless tenants, and the landlords in turn are rewarded with huge sums of money. And the city is pretending that the city's answer to why there's no accountability is that the landlords are not providing a service by renting a room. Now, the investigation...
Okay, can we just bring this to a close or a question so we can move on?
All right, so my question is, Controller Thompson came out with a study in 2003 saying this was an illegal practice. The city promised in 2003 to stop the practice. Why is this not being investigated?
We got the message.
I have not been called upon by the Controller's Office to conduct an investigation of that issue, and my understanding is that the Department of Homeless Services has made efforts to improve their procedures in that arena. And so I'm not aware of any fraud allegations that would necessitate or trigger a DOI investigation.
Hi, my name is Betsy Combier. I'm editor of parentadvocates.org. And good morning. I have in my hand information that shows approximately $381,224 missing in cash revenue from the Stuyvesant High School Parents Association. And for the last 5 years, I have tried to get somebody to recognize that there might be something going on. And I just gave Mr. Condon a copy. Your deputy commissioner, Thomas Fennell, called me up at home and told me he would never look into it, ever. So I'm asking that your agency look into this, because we believe the parents of Stuyvesant, at least half of all of the parents there believe that as for the last year and a half, I have been told I will never see the records, ever. And I have been called every name in the book. It starts with a B, an F, a W. My name is Betsy, and I'm simply a parent, but I'm not going away. And I request that your agency look at this, because I've sent it to you 5 times already. Thank you. Why aren't you? Why did Thomas Fennell tell me that he would never look into it? The co-president of the Stuyvesant PA works for Mike Bloomberg.
So you have filed your report with the special commissioner, and I assume that he will take a look at it, and this is the first I'm hearing of it, but we'll be happy to read your report.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
My name is Bernie Kabak. There's a story about Babe Ruth, who was once asked why he was being paid more than the President of the United States. I think the President was Coolidge at the time, and he was earning $80,000, and the Babe was paid $85,000. And the Babe said that, well, I had a better year than the President. Now, what that story tells me, besides that the Babe was an astute political observer, is that it was possible to be in public service and still make a living wage. I think today the disparity between what government workers earn and what can be earned in the general economy has widened enormously. I'm wondering if you think that there might be less corruption if public workers, especially at the lower level, were better paid.
You know, Mayor Koch, I think, addressed that point when he was in office and suffered several scandals, particularly in his third term. I think that some people said, well, if we earned more, we wouldn't have to steal, we wouldn't have to take bribes. And he said that that's not an excuse to engage in corruption or theft from within, and I agree with him completely. So salaries in the city are what they are. I think that salaries in the city, in the main, are quite good and reasonable. And in any event, from my perspective as the investigations commissioner, if we hear that excuse as an excuse for someone to steal from the city's resources, we just don't agree with it.
Good morning, Commissioner Hearn.
Good morning.
My name is Donald Winkfield. I'm president of Conscience Offices Against Retaliation and Corruption, and I'm also an investigative reporter with the Black Star News. I've been reporting corruption in the New York City Department of Corrections since 1995. A lot of that reports went to your office, Department of Investigations. The gentleman, Mr. Caruso, handled a lot of these complaints, which entailed corruption and fraud done by former Commissioner Bernard Bailey Carrick. I would like to know what has your agency done since Caruso has been fired by you, done to prevent any further stymieing from any investigators that corruption is reported to?
Well, I don't accept that any investigations were stymied. We've done an investigation of Bernard Carrick that resulted in his prosecution and conviction last year, which I referred to in my remarks. And the Inspector General for the Department of Correction, Mira Catafesta, is in place. And if you need her to take a look at anything, I would invite you to call her. She's terrific.
Okay, of course, I wish we would go back further than 5 years. As I said, I've been reporting this since 1998, and the corruption that I've reported in the Department of Corrections has not been investigated. And in reporting such corruption, I was ordered to a mandatory training session where both bones in my right ankle was broken, which today I feel was suspect. And most of it, like I said, was reported against Bernard Bailey Carrick, and he sent his hitmen to get me. And this was not investigated, like I'm saying, to this day.
So why don't you contact IG Catafesta, and you can give her those details.
Thank you. And how can someone get an appointment, a press appointment with yourself? I called your office about 3 times, and it seems that I know you're very busy, but at which point does investigative reporter and its editor can get an appointment with yourself?
My press officer is Diane Struzzi. She's here with me today, and she's extremely accessible, and you can reach her through our website or by calling her.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning, Dean Sandler, Commissioner. My name is Joseph Garber. I'm the corresponding secretary of the Civil Service Merit Council, a good government group that wholeheartedly endorses and supports D of I. I'd just like to make some friendly suggestions. Mayor's Executive Order 16 of 79 mandated that D of I not only look at bribery, but also look at waste, mismanagement, malfeasance, etc. I suggest you do a review of the Green Book, or this year the salmon-colored book, and the city charter, and try to call out duplicative functions in city agencies. In addition, there are lights burning in the city in the daytime, especially at NYCHA, which I've tried to get them to investigate, and they refuse, and we are losing money, and you can save money. So we have to look at the waste area of Mayor's Executive Order 16 and try to work in that area also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, I have a question. Okay, my name is Bruce Logan. I'm a supervisor at United Parcel Service for 10 years. We at UPS have measurable standards, quantitative standards for employees, like our drivers have to make 10.5 stops per road hour. I looked in to find out there's measurable standards for city employees, and I found out in general, there's no quantitative standards for employees, so for productivity. Are you aware of any standard or any examination of productivity for New York City employees?
I think that agencies are studying productivity daily. I think that that's really a hallmark of this administration. And every city employee at DOI, and therefore I assume this is a citywide practice, has tasks and standards by which personnel are evaluated each year.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Let me just add to that. The mayor's management report, which is available publicly, contains many of the standards, and if you go on the city's website, you'll find far more metrics for each agency, and you can see quite a few of them that are very close to what you just described for UPS. But I'd like to follow up with one question on that. One of the most difficult issues in studying corruption is to measure how much corruption there actually is, and whether what you do reduces it or not. The absence of a metric, we can show how much effort is expended to stop corruption, but it's very difficult to measure whether there's less or more corruption at any given point in time. And I wonder whether, in your position, you've come across or had any thoughts about how to measure the success, whether or not government is more or less honest as a result of all the efforts.
I can just go back to the example of the buildings department. And there we really did a forceful concentration with Commissioner Lancaster on changing what was an accepted culture of corruption. And we've had a few random arrests here or there, but we are not seeing, and therefore I think this is measurable and identifiable and tangible, we are not seeing these double-digit number of inspector arrests. In fact, we have more inspectors from the buildings department reporting bribe offers to us than ever before. So I think that that's a combination, a measurable combination of a concentration in an area and a real result, and the result happens to be an absence of result, an absence of arrests of inspectors. And so I think that's one area. The Housing Development Corporation, it was another agency that in 2002 we were faced with an investigation of, and their procedures needed to be reviewed, and their audit procedures, personnel procedures. There were very few checks and balances over the finances of the agency, and so we spent probably a year and a half working very closely with them to improve their procedures. There were personnel changes, and I think that HDC at this point is another success story in that it's being run extremely well. We have an inspector general staff in place over there now where there wasn't one before the HDC scandal of 2002. We did an MOU with HDC whereby they now by law permit DOI to be their IG even though they are a state agency, and they fund us 3 lines for an IG office. And so they wanted us to come in going forward and to provide them with oversight, and they're doing extremely well. And so I think those are 2 places where you can see a demonstrated improvement by virtue of the way in which they're being run now and an absence of the problems and arrests that we had in the past.
Jim Meyer, Arete Consulting. A question slightly related to Ross Sandler's last one. I'm curious about the cases you do not investigate, and perhaps 2 questions there. One, you mentioned that it's a small agency, 200 and some odd staff. Is that an issue for you? If you had more, would there be much more that you would investigate? And similarly, how do you prioritize or select those cases which you do investigate versus those that don't, or that get pushed to the back of the list?
So yes, I think we're relatively small. We're just under 300 people by comparison to the city's workforce, which is 320,000 people, 70 some odd agencies. So we are certainly small by comparison to our jurisdictional constituents. I will add that we have another 65 people under Commissioner Condon overseeing the Department of Education, and we have another 45 people, which constitutes our NYCHA IG office. So altogether, we're over 400 people overseeing all of those different places. That said, we receive 12,000 complaints a year. Many of them are not for us to address. They may be, housing issues or issues for the FBI or the police department. So many of them are referred out. What's left, though, remain thousands and thousands of complaints for what is, as you've appropriately described, a relatively small number of investigators. And thus, what we try and do are look for the impact cases. So where is there a case that cries out for investigation, that speaks to either a big dollar amount fraud or a procedural or a systemic problem at an agency or at multiple agencies. Certainly we want to take those cases. There's some category of cases that are small, relatively minor cases involving city employees, and we simply can't do all of them because of the volume. And in those circumstances, what we do is refer them to the agency's commissioner so that her own disciplinary unit can deal with those matters. So all matters are addressed that come in by referral, by us, or by us giving them to city agencies to attend to.
Just one follow-up then. Do you then follow up on those that get referred out in any way?
No, not typically, because every day there are more coming in. I mean, it's
Right.
a little difficult. I mean, there might be some follow-up on some of them, but I mean, if we refer a case to the police department or the FBI or the Department of Labor for them to take because it's theirs to take, it's not ours, not for us to do. No, I don't have the resources to follow up on all of those.
Okay. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Bill Morawski. I'm a public interest advocate, and in 2003, I brought a housing case to the attention of your department, and it's about HDFCs. If anybody who doesn't know what an HDFC is it's like a mini Mitchell-Lama, and it's overseen by HPD. I'd like to know if I could get a status of this, And also, there was just a letter sent to your office from a friend of mine, New York Guitar and Bass Boutique, and it seems like Department of Consumer Affairs just came in, fined him. He had to get a license, and there's no such license that he needed, and he lost a lot of business. So I'd like to know how I can follow up on that stuff.
Sure. Your HPD report can be given to my Deputy Commissioner, Vinnie Green, who's in charge of HPD, and your Consumer Affairs matter can be given to my Associate Commissioner, Bob Joyce, who's in charge of Consumer Affairs at DOI. So you can leave those matters with us. Sure.
I'd like to ask another question. You talked about the integrity monitors. I take it those are what we often call IPSIGs.
Yes.
I won't try and explain what IPSIG is. It's a monitor. But could you describe a little bit about the selection process, who gets to be an IPSIG, what are the expectations of these monitors, and what sorts of public reports do they provide and can be seen by the public?
So an IPSIG is essentially a monitor. It's someone from the private sector who has expertise in investigations, in audit work, and what we do is when we have a vendor, a contractor, that is doing a project for the city where the vendor has a problem, an integrity problem, an issue, and perhaps they come under investigation by one of the prosecutors, maybe an example of a problem, or they are determined to have overbilled the city in some manner that is less than a serious fraud but still a problem. Issues like that surrounding business integrity come up from time to time. In some cases, the city will simply stop doing business with such a vendor if it is very serious. But there are other cases that I mentioned before where the issue can be cured and or we feel and the agency feels that both because of the essential nature of the services that are being provided and the relatively non-serious integrity issue, that if we put someone in to watch that company going forward as they perform the contract to make sure that they are paying prevailing wage or that they are not overbilling the city, that things can go smoothly with that contract. Now, there are tens of thousands of contracts at any given time open in the city of New York, and I do not have the resources among my investigators to watch any one contract as it is performed. I can't audit the books and records or physically be on site for any of these contracts as they're performed. So we extend our resources by mandating that the company hire a monitor. The company has to pay for the monitor. The city's not going to pay for the monitor because it was brought about as a result of the problem that the company has. And so if they want to keep the contract and continue to perform it, they must hire a monitor and be monitored at their expense, and then they can continue with the contract. Now, who are these monitors? There are many firms in the private sector, that I won't name any of them because that wouldn't be fair, but people who are former law enforcement, investigative firms, computer forensic firms, environmental engineering firms, audit firms. So whatever the issue was with the contract, we will look to the list of monitors that we have and decide which ones might be good for this particular issue and then make a selection. So how do you become a monitor who is on the DOI list or radar screen? And the answer is that we issued a request for expressions of interest last year, and any firm that wished to was free to write to us with their company's bio or resume, setting forth their areas of expertise and describing their personnel, And so, for example, some principal at this firm might be the former head of the Organized Crime Task Force. And so we'll have a bio, on that. And so if I'm called upon to perhaps address what might be an organized crime tie, may or may not be an organized crime tie in a company, I might call upon a company that has an individual like that with that expertise to be the monitor for that company. We then get reports regularly from the monitor with respect to what they're doing. They're not typically public reports, to answer Ross's question, just like you don't get reports from my actual investigators as they are investigating a matter. We don't put out to the public what a monitor is doing, because really a monitor is one of our investigators by extension. Now, if the monitor tells us that everything is going smoothly, the contract will run its course, and that will end it. The monitors, however, can tell us that there's a violation or there's a chronic series of violations, in which case we will go to the city agencies. We'll certainly go to the agency whose contract it is. We'll go to the law department. We'll go to the Mayor's Office of Contracts, and we'll say, look, the monitor is continually finding that there's a problem. These problems are not being cured, and they're incessant. And so we think that the monitor is not enough, it's not working, and the contract has to be terminated. And so those are the different results that can come from a monitor program.
I'm Bill Henning with the Communications Workers Local 1180. When I started working for the city some 31 years ago, somebody told me the Department of Investigation hangs who the mayor wants hung and buries what the mayor wants buried. In light of the cloud hanging over, the name Bernard Kerik is an obvious example. You reported on the front page of the New York Times, your agency met with the Giuliani administration. Nothing happened. He continued to be the progressively important jobs in the city. How do you guard against cronyism? How do you guard, and I think about that because this morning I heard about the Paul Wolfowitz story at the World Bank, got involved in making sure his girlfriend got a nice job. I mean, this is not somebody he's married to. It's not somebody that's going to show up necessarily on some kind of disclosure form. How does your agency both ensure independence and guard against that kind of cronyism where there's no license that shows that there's a relationship between the decision maker and somebody who benefits from it, whether it's a city employee or a city contractor?
I think those are two separate questions. With respect to the independence at DOI, I have statutory independence. I'm the only city commissioner who, while appointed by the mayor, has to be confirmed by the city council. And the purpose of that statutory feature is so that the council can have a check and balance on the mayor to ensure that the mayor isn't hiring some kind of a crony who they are opposed to. So that's one statutory feature of independence. I have an arm's length relationship with Mayor Bloomberg. I have a great deal of respect for him. I have an arm's length relationship to him, however. I have a direct report to him, which I use sparingly. I will call him if I think that there's an issue that he needs to know about or address, but it's quite arm's length, as any inspector general needs to be. I will say that my job in the last 5.5 years has been made much easier, in addition to the statutory independence, by virtue of the very principled way in which Mayor Bloomberg conducts himself, and he demands that of members of his administration. He gave me only one instruction when I took the job, well, two actually. The first was to just always do what's right. Very simple. And the second was to not screw it up, which he tells all of his commissioners. So that's the way it works with the mayor's office. And he's never told me to get anyone or to bury anyone or not do something or do something. And so that's that. Now, on cronyism, the city has a very good and rigorous set of ethics laws. And the Conflict of Interest Board is in charge of enforcing those ethics laws. And they speak to cronyism and jobs for family members and so forth that you just raised. In essence, a city employee cannot use his or her job to get something of benefit for himself or for certain close family members. And we do, from time to time, conduct investigations where either that's suspected, and sometimes we prove it, and we refer our findings to the Conflict of Interest Board, which in that scenario has taken action time and again with fines and other penalties.
Let me take that opportunity to say that in May we have our annual Conflicts of Interest seminar here with the Conflicts of Interest Board. You're all cordially invited, and you're rewarded with 4 CLE credits in the ethics area, very difficult to get, so I hope that you all sign up. Last question short, please.
To follow up, Jim Meyer again, follow up on the earlier one. And first I want to make clear I have no agenda. My sense is your office has done a great job. But it seems to based on your answer, there is this large body of cases that don't arise to the level of getting investigated. And I'm wondering if there has been any consideration that you're aware of setting up some kind of a unit or some kind of operation that would address those little ones. It may be that a small case takes as much investigation as a large one at times. I don't know. So the question's really out of ignorance, but it just seems to me that those who feel that they have been violated or in such a situation, the level of anger has got to be very, very high.
I think it's a fair question, and really it speaks to fairness, and it speaks to the public's ability to get action from my department. There is a crush of business that comes in to us literally every single day. It is a resource issue, but I really want to emphasize that notwithstanding the thousands of complaints that we receive, every single one is reviewed. We get them by phone. We have a hotline number. We get them through our website. Sometimes people walk in to our reception area and they are permitted to speak to someone. Many, many people write to us. And so we receive letters, both anonymous and not anonymous. Every single complaint is looked at. When complaints come in that are anonymous, we sometimes can't do anything with them because there isn't sufficient information to proceed, and there's no one for us to contact. And so any complaint that we can't act on literally is not thrown in the trash. It is entered into a computer database that we have, and whatever scraps of information or more than scraps of information were in such complaints that we can't act on go into a computer database, so that if 6 months later we get a complaint that perhaps is more detailed or is not anonymous, we can query a database and say, oh, look, this is what this other complaint must have been getting at, and then we can start to maybe weave some threads together. But I do want to emphasize that complaints are referred to other places to be sure. We don't just get a complaint and say, you know what, this is about, a lack of hot water in the building. That's not us. That's HPD, and throw it in the trash. That's not what happens. I have IGs of all the city agencies who work at DOI who will liaison a complaint directly to the appropriate city agency where it needs to go. Or we are a law enforcement agency. We liaison, therefore, complaints to our sister law enforcement agencies, which is where they need to go. We take some. We have approximately 1,000 cases open at any given time with our 290 people. And others are given to the departments that are considered minor. That someone, skipped out of work early one day, or that someone, was rude to a subordinate. I can't do those sorts of disciplinary type cases. The departments themselves, the agencies themselves are well able to do that. And of course, if they need our help with something, they could always come back to us and ask us for help.
Thank you. This has been a very enlightening discussion. I want to thank the Commissioner as well, because as she said, she was in Chicago yesterday, did not get back to New York until early this morning, and You were very alert and answered some very tough questions. As we always do at these breakfasts, we like to give to our speakers a product of the scholarship of this law school, and I'd like to present to Commissioner the book by my colleague Ed Purcell, Brandeis and the Progressive Constitution, an award-winning study. It's a wonderful book, and it's given with thanks for your wonderful presentation this morning.
Thank you.
We will see you in September.